Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of my top 100 albums of all time up until August 2017. Yes, it's taken me that long to start getting finish this list off. But anyway, today we are tackling albums 39 to 30 on this list. So, welcome to it. Let's get into it, shall we? In at number 39 on this list is some Australian grindcore for you, the one and only the Berserker with his second album, Dissimulate. This was something different when it came to extreme metal. I still love the Berserker. It's a shame they broke up, but you could hear as the albums went on that he was losing a bit of interest in doing it due to record company politics, etc. But the clash of sort of grindcore with the industrial elements he brought into it, some of which were originally meant to be sort of influenced by Devin Townsend, who was going to produce the album along with Jed Simon, both a strapping young lad, but things fell through there. Can you imagine how heavy this album has sounded if that had happened? Anyway, this album, it's just a full-on attack. Whereas the first album was some actual tracks on the first album were pretty much pure noise. This is more riff-based, more groovy, more full-on. Like speeds reached on this album on some of the drum is ridiculous, especially their cover, the Carcass classic song that has completely, the name of it has gone out of my head. That's great thinking there, Ronnie. I'm sure I've just flashed it up on screen, but anyway, just go listen to anything off this album. It's also got the principles and practices of embalming, which is an absolutely great, slower, grooving kind of grindcore song. Sorry, bit of indigestion there. The Berserker sadly ended. We've had no band like them since. For some reason, don't get that much respect in the extreme metal scene. Never understood why. Australia doesn't really take that much notice of them. Yet they were a fantastic band. And Luke, the lead vocalist and the man behind it all, I did meet him actually at one of their gigs. Very nice man indeed. Had a beer with him. Really great experience. So, Luke, if you're watching this, please get the Berserker back together. It's time for a reunion, for you to get the respect you deserve. Anyway, the Berserker and Dissimulate right here at number 39. Also, on another note, if you want to see about the absolute torment, I suppose you could say, that Luke went through getting the Berserker off the ground with a record label and getting the first album recorded, I can thoroughly recommend, if it's on YouTube or if you want to get the DVD to support the band, their DVD and the principles and practices of the Berserker. It's a really interesting look into it, a really interesting look into how far some musicians will push themselves to make their perfect album. At number 38, we're continuing the more extreme side of metal with another death metal album, Nile and In Their Darkened Shrines. This was a watershed moment for death metal when this came out. Nile had been doing their own thing for a while, and the kind of Egyptian themed death metal with a lot of history lessons, kind of going down the same route lyrically as Morbid Angel, but it was more with a focus more on Egyptian themes, etc. And they started bringing it more and more into their music, and then they come out with this absolute legendary piece of work known as In Their Darkened Shrines. This album, there's not a bad song on it, and Nile have to be probably the only death metal band that can get away with doing a 13-minute long death metal song. And it doesn't get boring, it doesn't get dull. This album has enough variety on it to keep you interested. The riffs are top notch, the vocals are top notch. The booklets in every Nile album pretty much let you know about the stories behind the songs, what they're actually speaking about in the songs. Just the complete package, this album, and one of the greatest death metal albums of all time. In at 37, I told you I like my new metal, and here's one of the bands that truly got me into it as well. Korn with their debut album, also named Korn. This album, again, another watershed moment in metal, because no one knew quite how to take this when it first came out in 1994-95. This was something new. There was no guitar solos, but they had the same kind of pounding rhythms and heavy guitar riffs as someone like Pantera, while bringing a new emotional weight to it thanks to Jonathan Davis's lyrics and bold-faced vocal histrionics, etc., and not afraid to show his emotions in the song. Also has one of the most emotionally devastating songs ever recorded in the last song, Daddy, because, Christ, that song features about a minute and a half of Jonathan Davis literally sobbing in the vocal studio because the song's lyrics have affected him that much, the memories of it. It's a devastating listen throughout, with songs about being bullied and everything else, and it's just absolutely incredible to this day. Korn with Korn, go check it out. At number 36, it's time to bring some of my Britishness out, as it was, with some classic UK prog. I am, of course, talking about Pink Floyd and The Wall. Is it my favourite Pink Floyd album? Yes and no. How can I put this? I also love Animals album, and I also obviously love Dark Side of the Moon, but there's something... For me, this is their most complete album. This is the album that hangs together the most. I know there's I know there's a contingent of Pink Floyd fans who maybe don't dig this album as much as their other work, think maybe Roger Waters took over the reins a little bit too much on this album. Fair enough, I understand where you're coming from, but for me, this is the complete Pink Floyd experience. It's got the levels of psychedelia you'd want on there, along with the amazing guitar playing from David Gilmour as ever, and those vocals and the lyrics. Gets a little bit weird on the story near the end, but when it's a story about someone who literally gets famous and then loses his mind, it is absolutely affecting. So in here on this list at number 36, Pink Floyd and The Wall. And now back to the more extreme stuff. At number 35, one of the few hardcore bands I really enjoy. I'm not a massive fan of hardcore, but Will Haven and El Diablo, their debut album. Good Lord, this album, Christ, it blew me away. Will Haven have something different about them. Even though their structures of their songs are fairly simple and their riffs are not the most technical thing you're going to hear, there's something special about Will Haven. I can't explain why it is. Usually I hear shouty bloke over generic slow riffs, it gets boring. But Will Haven don't do that. Will Haven have a certain style to their music that has not been replicated by any other band. I don't think any other band could do it. Will Haven are just Will Haven. Don't quite know where the band name came from, because now the band are called Will Haven. But yeah, this album, absolutely superb. It's got foreign films on it, one of the best closing songs of any album ever. So if you like it heavy, you like a bit of hardcore, but you're not a massive fan of the normal hardcore bands such as Throwdown and bloody Hatebreed, then go check out Will Haven, a really underappreciated gem in the metal community. At number 34, we are back to the thrash with Chaos AD by Sepultura. How could this not be in our top 100 best albums ever made? This album is a real classic of thrash metal. Brazilian band Sepultura have been getting better and better since their debut album back in 1980s. I will say 6. I could be wrong on that. It started as a bit of a death metal stroke thrash band and just evolving into more of a straightforward thrash band. And then later on, after this, they brought in the world music influences thanks to Max Cavalera. But this is the absolute superb top moment of Sepultura for me. And I don't really have to say much more apart from this is the album that has Territory, Refuse Resist, and something about Slave on it. I can't remember the name of it. But yeah, that's with a lineup like that on the track listing, and knowing there's other hidden gems on that album, you don't need to hear much more about this album. Go listen to it. Go listen to it now. Continuing the thrash, another album that really you should definitely have in your collection. Although the lead singer's voice, fair enough, a lot of people do seem to find it a bit grating. It is Megadeth and their classic Rust in Peace. This is why Megadeth, for my personal opinion, deserve to be the top of the big four. This album, along with Symphony of Destruction, which I'm pretty sure isn't the name of the album, but it's gone out of my head at the moment, and Euthanasia. Yes, I actually like Euthanasia, despite it being a more commercial album, as it were. And Countdown to Extinction, that's the name of the album, Symphony of Destruction on it. Although a lot of people may prefer Peace Sells, I was never a massive fan of that album. It has Wake Up Dead, which is one of my favourite Megadeth songs ever, along with obviously Peace Sells, but the rest of the album never done much for me. Whereas Rust in Peace, good lord, this album, I could listen to this album again and again on repeat and not get bored of it. Again, as I said, I know people aren't the biggest fan of Dave Mustaine's voice, or indeed Dave Mustaine, the guy, is a bit of an acerbic git sometimes, well, quite a lot of the time, but you cannot deny the man's talent with a guitar and making those riffs. So yes, another album that you should definitely have in your collection and go listen to remind yourself of how good it is right now. In at number 32, we are back to my indie roots, and again, it is another Radiohead album. The Bends, their second album ever. This is where Radiohead really started to find their own sound. It's got some surprisingly heavy moments on it. As much as people don't bring it up, the song Just, it's a free guitar attack with a great riff and a great build-up, and yet no one brings it up as being a heavier song. I mean, I'd love to hear a metal band sort of cover that song and do it really well, because honestly, it is a fantastic song in its own right. This also has Street Spirit on it, one of the greatest kind of, I guess you could call ballads in a way, but it's not a love ballad, far from it. And it's just, all in all, just a fantastic album that hangs together really, really well. So that's all I really have to say about it. Radiohead and the Bends. In at 31 now, this is obscure because this is actually an album from an unsigned band from where I live, but it's that damn good that I had to put it on here. In at number 31, Oceans Aside and Tidal Rage. Sadly, the band broke up I believe it was last year, due to just not having the time to rehearse or write new songs together anymore. I'd love for them to get together, because this album, this is passionate post-hardcore music done right. It's amazing to me that they never got any label interest or anything, because live they were superb, and then they released this album, oh my god, they really, really hit it out of the park. You've got Mike's superb drumming, you've got Mark's amazing vocals, you've got the guitarists coming up with some fantastic riffing, and of course the bass helping the low end, and just all in all one of the greatest bands to ever come out of Southend. And yet, sadly, they never really reached their full potential. So I'm putting it forward now. Oceanside Reunion 2018. Make it happen, guys. Make it happen. In at number 30, one of the greatest bands ever, Deftones, with their second album, Around the Fair. This album blew my mind when I first heard it. They have strayed from this kind of sound, because it still has some nu metal influences, and they did kind of unfairly get lumped into the nu metal crowd when really they were far from nu metal. They were more like a heavier Faith No More than anything else, and indeed they've gone on to more experimental sounds, etc. Over the years, with albums like Gore and Diamond Eyes, etc. But this album, this was still getting that kind of teenage angst out, as it were. I mean, this has My Own Summer Shove It, a hardcore, an absolute metal classic, as it were. And this is probably the start of what was to become known as post-hardcore, because after this you start getting bands such as the classic Glassjaw and bands like that coming out. I'd say Deftones and Knife of Agony were two of the biggest proponents that helped influence the whole post-hardcore movement. But anyway, yes, Deftones and Around the Fair here at number 30. Anyway, we're at the end of this part of the list. Coming up soon, 29 to 20. Up on the screen right now, you can see the link to my Patreon. If you want to become a Patreon, go follow that link on your browser. If you become a Patreon, I thank you very much. Any money you can put towards helping me run the channel is very much appreciated, and that money will go back into content for the channel, along with improving the equipment, etc., so that my videos can look better and hopefully sound better. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.